Okay, let's talk about Chapter 16, welfare policy. It's actually welfare and education policy. I'm probably just going to focus on welfare policy, the entitlement system, and then a little bit about immigration, and then we'll just call it a day here on this chapter. I'm not going to get into this too deeply, but the issue of poverty. Okay, as of 2012, the poverty level was $23,000 a year in earnings for a family of four. Okay, and 1 in 7 Americans are considered at or below the poverty line. And we could go long on this as far as the causes of it. A big problem of it, as far as the cause, is simply the breakdown of the family. Moms and dads, husbands and wives not staying together, and children being raised in single-parent families contributes greatly to this problem. And if you see the slide there, slide 42, a single-parent family-headed family is 5 times as likely as a 2-income family to fall below the poverty line. Okay, and it's widespread amongst minorities. The exception is within the Chinese. They tend to have a great work ethic and they're very well educated. I remember when I lived in Champaign, the University of Illinois has the largest contingent of Chinese students in any university in America. So it's not unusual to go to the food court in the big mall there and basically you feel like you're in China. I mean, just tons of Chinese students. And I remember going to some of the university libraries to study and do some research when I was working in my grad degree, and you would see these Chinese students, man, from the moment that library opened to the moment that they closed. They weren't horsing around, they weren't talking, they weren't messing around with their friends. They were just studying. I mean, they were just so intense, and their work ethic is really something to marvel at. And so because of that, the Chinese within America are generally not well above the poverty line. Again, work ethic's a big deal, and obviously strong families is a big deal. So if you turn to slide number 43, we're talking about the politics and the policies of social welfare. At America's founding, the founders made provision for the poor, but it was generally accepted that individuals would basically be self-governed enough to take care of themselves. Remember, our founding definition of government based on Webster's 1828 dictionary is that the fundamental level of government is self-government, okay? And so within the founding era, they did have minimal means to take care of the poor. There was something called the poorhouse that you could go to that would take care of you in a difficult financial situation. But there was such a social stigma against going to the poorhouse that if you went there, you didn't want to stay there long, because it was almost like this negative thing that you and your family were in the poorhouse. In other words, there was a lot of self-initiative to where I'm not going to rely on the government. I'm not going to rely on a poorhouse to better my situation. I'm going to work really, really hard, get multiple jobs, whatever it takes. I'm going to get out of that situation. And so basically the approach of the founders was something called negative government. Okay, and you can see there in the bottom of slide number 43 is this idea that government governs best by staying out of people's lives so they can determine their own pursuits and become self-reliant. In other words, within the founding era and well after that, the assumption was you can make as much money as you want. You can get as great of an education as you want. You can advance yourself and your family as much as you want. It's your choice. Government's not going to do it for you. You do it for yourself. But what government is going to do is it's going to basically stay out of your life, protect your natural rights so that you are free to advance. Okay? In other words, nowhere in the radar screen of the founding generation or in the succeeding generations well before the 20th century was this idea that government must step in to help you. Okay, that was totally foreign to their thinking. Again, remember, the founding generation and the succeeding generations after them, they were pilgrims and they were pioneers and they were entrepreneurs, and they were creators. And in other words, they did not have the government providing for the means for their health care or any other entitlement program. It was basically a self-sufficient culture. Okay, now that is radically shifted in the modern era. And so if you look in slide number 44, what shifted? Number one, a change in anthropology. Okay, a change in thinking of what it means to be human, that a human is a responsible moral agent. Okay, in other words, you're responsible. You're responsible for your economic circumstance. You're responsible for your education. You're responsible for your moral development. You're not a victim. Okay, that is shifted to the modern era, that you're no longer a free moral agent that's responsible, but you're more a victim of circumstances. Okay, so again, warranting government help. Second of all, it's a general weakening of self-government. Okay, I like what cultural analyst Don Eberle says. There is an inverse relationship between the ethical constitution of a nation and the size and scope of government. The erosion of cultural norms practically ensures that the state becomes the arbiter of conflict and will continually expand. In other words, in the absence of self-government, okay, in the absence of that, in the absence of some form of cultural norm for the right behavior or something like that, the state's got to come in and step in, okay? And so that changes, and that causes the government to get more involved. And then third of all, and I've talked about this a lot, the progressive era that began in the 1890s and basically phased out in the 1920s, maybe early the 1930s. So it lasted about 30, 40 years, but it's the remnants of that viewpoint remain today, okay? And again, this idea that human nature is basically good, and so you can give government more power. Because again, government and those that pull the levers of government are not sinful, okay? They're good, so we can trust them with more and more power, okay? And then you throw in the Great Depression, you throw in 25% unemployment, you throw in the economic breakdown of the country, and people started shifting their gaze toward government. So those three aspects, the change in anthropology, a general weakening of self-government, again, thinking, hey, I'm not responsible anymore, I'm a victim, and then the progressive era combined with the Great Depression, and that shifted how people tended to look at and view government as the means to get people out of their dire circumstances. So if you go to slide number 45, it's a changed conception of rights. Okay, whereas the founding era had a conception of negative rights. Okay, government is supposed to protect you, okay, so that you can enjoy freedom. Government's going to secure your natural rights. Okay, there's this transition that government is no longer the securer of your natural rights, but it's the giver of new rights because you're a victim of your circumstance, okay? So this idea of positive government intervention is necessary in order to enhance personal liberty and security when individuals are buffeted by economic and social forces beyond their control. Okay, the CARE Act, okay? Because of the coronavirus, that's a great example of positive government. You can't deal with this unemployment, you can't deal with this economic downturn, you can't deal with all of the ill effects of this coronavirus, so the government's going to give you checks. The government's going to extend things for you. The government's going to help you in certain ways. Again, you can see why this would become attractive in a time of dire circumstances. The challenge remains once there's no longer dire economic circumstances. And let's say the unemployment rate is 0.5% and the economy's booming and the stock market's booming and basically everyone can find a job. Is it really incumbent upon the government to continue to provide for people? Okay, these are some of the challenges. So I want to look at the next couple of slides here. Slide number, let's see, that's 46 and 47, looking at a speech given by FDR in January of 1944 to Congress. It's his annual message to Congress. After the Great Depression and in the midst of World War II, basically Franklin Roosevelt began to argue, listen, you are not a free people anymore. Okay, because of poverty, because of circumstances beyond your control, you need the government to step in and start providing for you. Okay, so you can start seeing his logic that he began to argue here, and what he argues for in this second annual message, or this annual message to Congress, is for a second Bill of Rights. Okay, there was the initial Bill of Rights, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and things of that nature. Well, because of circumstances beyond Americans' control, he's advocating a new Bill of Rights, a group of positive rights that the government must provide for people, or if government doesn't provide these for people, they're no longer free. Okay, but then it begs the question, do you require government to be free? And anyway, we can talk about that later. But so let's read this here. So he says, we have come to a clear realization of the fact that true individual freedom cannot exist without economic security and independence. Necessitous men are not free men. People who are hungry and out of a job are the stuff of which dictatorships are made. In our day, these economic truths have become accepted as self-evident. We have accepted, so to speak, a second Bill of Rights under which a new basis of security and prosperity can be established for all, regardless of station, race, or creed. Among these are, and again, he's arguing for government, the national government must now provide this for you because you are no longer free because you're needy. So among these are the right to a useful and remunerative job in the industries or shops or farms or mines of the nation, the right to earn enough to provide adequate food and adequate clothing and recreation, the right of every farmer to raise and sell his product at a return which will give him and his family a decent living, the right of every businessman, large and small, to trade in an atmosphere of freedom from unfair competition and domination by monopolies at home or abroad, the right of every family to a decent home, the right to adequate medical care and the opportunity to achieve and enjoy good health, the right to adequate protection from the economic fears of old age, sickness, accident, and unemployment, the right to a good education. All of these rights spell security. And after this war is won, we must be prepared to move forward in the implementation of these rights to new goals of human happiness and well-being. So what he's saying is freedom through government intervention. Okay, in other words, you cannot be happy, you cannot be free, you cannot be independent unless government provides it for you. Again, literally taking the founder's conception of what government was about and literally turning it on its head and saying, now you cannot be free, you cannot be independent, and you cannot be happy without the government stepping in. So again, this is a great example of progressivism. Okay, this idea of we're progressing beyond the founder's constitution and basically rejecting what it advocated, that government exists to secure your natural rights, not to grant you rights, to now government must grant you rights or you cannot be free. So I'm going to stop there.